The dog was staring at her, not growling, not moving, just staring, with those pale amber eyes that seemed to hold more intelligence than any animal had a right to possess. Nina Lawson stood frozen in the middle of the hospital corridor, one hand still outstretched, close enough to feel the warmth rising from the animal's black and tan coat. Her fingertips were maybe 4 inches from his ear, 4 inches from the worst decision she would make in her entire nursing career. She had been a nurse for exactly 4 days. The signs were everywhere. 3 of them, in fact, fixed to the wall, the checkpoint desk, and the door leading into the secure wing of Greystone Regional Medical Center. Bold black text on a yellow background. No fancy language. No room for misinterpretation. Do not approach the dog. Do not speak to the dog. Do not touch the dog under any circumstances. The handler had even told every staff member personally during the orientation briefing 2 weeks earlier. Nina had been there. She had nodded. She had understood. And yet, standing in that corridor on a quiet Thursday afternoon, with the dog sitting alone beside the checkpoint and looking, in Nina's own words later, like the loneliest creature she had ever seen, she had reached out anyway. Her name was Nina Lawson. She was 24 years old. She had graduated at the top of her class from the nursing program at Caldwell University, carrying a grade average that made her professors talk about her at faculty dinners. She was the kind of person who stayed 30 minutes late to check on patients who weren't even on her assignment list, who memorized the names of the cleaning staff on her first week, and who, when she saw any living creature that appeared to be in distress, felt a pull in her chest that her brain was not always fast enough to override. The dog's name was Aries. He was a Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, trained by the United States military at a cost that would have paid Nina's rent for 6 years. He was not lonely. He was not sad. He was, in fact, doing exactly what he was supposed to do, which was to sit at the checkpoint and wait for his handler to return from the restroom. He was working. He was always working. That was the thing Nina did not fully understand in that moment. The thing that would cost her more than she was prepared to lose. Her fingers made contact. Aries did not flinch. He did not growl, bite, or pull away. He simply looked at her with those amber eyes and held perfectly still, the way only a highly trained animal can hold still, the way that looks like patience, but is actually something closer to controlled restraint. Nina scratched gently behind his right ear. He blinked once. She heard boots on the floor before she saw the man. Sergeant Dale Cooper was 38 years old and had spent 15 of those years working with military dogs in conditions that most people could not imagine. He had handled dogs in the mountains of Afghanistan, on the floors of abandoned buildings in places that did not appear on any civilian map, and in the quiet, controlled environments of military hospitals where the rules existed not because someone behind a desk decided to write them down, but because someone, somewhere, had learned the hard way what happened when they were not followed. He had Aries for 2 years. He knew every behavioral signal that dog produced. He knew what Aries ate, how he slept, how he responded to sound, touch, and unfamiliar environments. He had spent months calibrating that animal's responses so that they were predictable, reliable, and safe. A stranger's hand behind his ear was not part of that calibration. Cooper stepped into the corridor and stopped. His eyes moved from Nina's hand to Aries, then to Nina's face. He did not raise his voice. He did not say anything immediately. He crossed the distance between them in 4 steps, placed himself between Nina and the dog, and looked at her with an expression that was not anger, exactly, but something quieter and more serious than anger, the expression of a man who has just watched someone put their hand into a piece of equipment they do not understand and cannot repair if something goes wrong. "Step back, please," he said. His voice was level. Nina pulled her hand back and stepped away. "I'm sorry," she said. "He looked like he was by himself, and I just—" "The signs are on the wall," Cooper said. "There are 3 of them." "I know. I saw them. I wasn't thinking." "No," he said. "You weren't." He did not say anything else to her. He crouched beside Aries, ran a systematic hand along the dog's side in a specific sequence that was part of a behavioral check Nina did not recognize, and then stood up and clipped the lead back onto Aries's harness. He walked the dog back toward the secure wing entrance without looking at Nina again. She stood in the corridor for a moment after he was gone. The hallway was quiet. A cart rolled past at the far end. Somewhere deeper in the building, a monitor beeped in a steady, unconcerned rhythm. Nina picked up the medication tray she had set down when she reached for Aries, checked that nothing had spilled, and walked back to her station. She told herself it was a small thing, a momentary lapse, a mistake that had caused no harm to anyone. She was wrong about that last part, though she would not find out how wrong for another week. Nina's first 4 days at Greystone had been, by any reasonable measure, excellent. Her supervising nurse, a woman named Carol Sims who had spent 22 years in emergency medicine and had the unshakable calm of someone who had seen every possible combination of human crisis, had told the department head after day 2 that Nina was one of the sharpest new graduates she had worked with in years. The patients responded to her. She was efficient without being mechanical, and warm without being distracted by her own warmth, which was a balance that took most nurses years to find. Greystone was not a small hospital, but it was not a famous one either. It sat at the edge of a mid-sized city in the southeastern part of the country, surrounded by a modest skyline and a large veteran population. 18 months before Nina's first day, the hospital had signed a partnership agreement with the Department of Defense, opening a dedicated secure wing on the 4th floor for the treatment of active-duty military personnel and certain government-affiliated patients. The wing had its own entrance, its own elevator codes, its own staff credentialing system, and its own security protocols, one of which was the K9 checkpoint that Cooper and Aries managed at the boundary between the public hospital and the restricted area. The partnership had brought money into the hospital, which had brought new equipment, which had brought better staff, which had made the hospital better, on balance, for every patient who walked through its main doors. It had also brought a layer of administrative complexity that the hospital's leadership had not fully anticipated, a web of regulations and liability clauses and federal compliance requirements that sat beneath the daily routine of the place like a foundation that nobody walked around thinking about until a crack appeared. Nina was about to become a crack. She went home that Thursday evening and cooked rice and vegetables in her small apartment. She called her mother, who asked how the job was going, and Nina said it was going well. She did not mention the dog. She watched an episode of a television show she had been meaning to catch up on for months, and fell asleep on the couch before the second episode finished. Her alarm went off at 5:15 the next morning, and she was back at Greystone by 6:30, moving through the morning with the focused energy of someone who is exactly where they want to be. She passed the checkpoint 3 times before noon. Each time Cooper was present. Each time he watched her pass without acknowledgement. Aries sat at his station and stared at the middle distance with the calm, unreadable attention that was simply his face, the way some people have resting expressions that tell you nothing at all. On Saturday, she worked a double shift and covered for a colleague who had a family emergency. Carol Sims stopped her in the corridor near the end of the day and told her she was doing a remarkable job. Nina thanked her and meant it. She thought, by then, that the incident was behind her. On Monday morning, she was called into a meeting with Human Resources before her shift officially began. The email had arrived Sunday night, subject line reading only, follow-up regarding security compliance, with a time and a room number. Nina read it twice. Her stomach did the thing it did when something was wrong. A slow drop, like stepping off a curb in the dark when you thought there was still ground beneath your foot. She arrived early. The room was small and held a rectangular table, 4 chairs, a box of tissues, and a pitcher of water. The tissues and the water were, she would later think, the clearest possible signal of how the next 40 minutes would go. The HR director, a man named Philip Carroll, came in with a woman from the hospital's legal team whose name Nina did not catch, and a DoD liaison officer named Greta Walsh, who wore civilian clothes but carried herself with the posture of someone who had spent a great deal of time in uniform. They sat across from Nina. Carroll placed a folder on the table and smoothed it with his palm. He told her they had received a formal incident report from Sergeant Cooper, submitted through the proper military channels, and then forwarded to the hospital's compliance office. The report documented the unauthorized contact with a classified working animal on the afternoon of the previous Thursday. Walsh explained, in a tone that was careful and not unkind but also absolute, that military working dogs operated under specific behavioral conditioning protocols, that contact from unauthorized personnel introduced variables that could not be fully assessed or corrected without weeks of behavioral monitoring, and that the agreement between Greystone and the Department of Defense contained explicit provisions requiring the hospital to maintain zero-tolerance compliance with K9 handling procedures. Nina listened. She did not interrupt. She explained what had happened exactly as it had happened, No embellishment, no excuse, just the facts. She had seen the dog alone. She had not been thinking clearly. She had reached out. She understood that it was wrong and she was sorry. Carol nodded throughout. Then he told her that, given the terms of the hospital's DoD partnership and the nature of the probationary period she was currently completing, the hospital had no choice but to terminate her employment, effective immediately. Nina heard the words. She understood them individually. It took her several seconds to arrange them into the thing they actually meant. She asked if there was an appeal process. Carol said the decision had been reviewed before this meeting. She asked if there was anything else she could provide, any context, any documentation of her performance over the past several days. Walsh said the issue was not her performance. The issue was the compliance clause. Nina nodded. She stood up. She shook Carol's hand, then Walsh's. The legal woman had not spoken once during the entire meeting. Nina picked up her bag and walked out of the room, and down the hallway and into the elevator, and through the lobby, and out the main entrance, and into the parking lot. She sat in her car for 11 minutes before she started the engine. She had 89 days of nursing experience, 1 day short of the threshold that would have ended her probationary period and made her termination significantly more complicated for the hospital to execute. She had student loan debt totaling $63,000. She had a lease on an apartment that ran for another 9 months. She had a mother who was going to ask her again next Sunday how the job was going. She started the engine and drove home. She did not know, sitting in that car in the Greystone parking lot, that someone else had been in the building that morning. Someone who had watched the HR meeting through the glass panel beside the door with a phone held low and steady. Someone who had a habit of filming things she suspected were going to matter. That footage already existed. It was sitting in a phone's camera roll, waiting. And in approximately 60 hours, the entire country would have an opinion about it. Philip Carroll had been in human resources for 19 years. He had delivered termination notices to people who cried, people who went silent, people who argued, people who threatened, and people who simply nodded and left, which was always, in his experience, the most unsettling response of all. Nina Lawson had nodded and left. He had driven home that evening with a faint discomfort he could not entirely name, the kind that comes not from having done something wrong, exactly, but from having done something that was technically correct and still felt like dropping a coin down a drain. He told himself the decision was sound. The hospital's DoD contract had been audited twice in the past year. The compliance requirements were not suggestions. The hospital had $62 million in federal partnership revenue tied to maintaining the terms of that agreement, and one nurse, however talented, was not worth $62 million in liability exposure. He believed all of that. He also left the office 30 minutes earlier than usual that Monday and did not check his emails again until the following morning, by which time the video already had 400,000 views. The person who posted it was a travel nurse named Laura Grant. She was 31 years old and had worked in 7 hospitals across 5 states in the previous 4 years, which gave her a very particular kind of education that nursing school did not offer. She had learned, through direct and sometimes painful experience, how institutions behave when they are under pressure, what the language of corporate regret actually means versus what it says, and precisely how quickly a person can be made to disappear from a system that generated the paperwork around them and then shredded it. She filmed things. She had filmed things for years, not for attention, not for platforms, not for the kind of online presence that some people built their identities around. She filmed things because she had seen, more than once, an event that everyone present remembered differently, and she had found that a video made the remembering much simpler. She had been in the corridor that Monday morning because she had arrived for her own shift 15 minutes early, as she always did, and had gone to the staff break room near the administrative wing to make coffee. She had come out of the break room and seen Nina walking into the HR meeting room, had noted the presence of the DoD liaison, and had, without really making a conscious decision about it, stayed in the corridor. She was not close enough to hear what was being said. She did not need to be. She watched Carol's posture, watched Walsh's hands, watched Nina's face through the glass. Nina's face told her everything. She had seen that face before, on other people, in other corridors. She recognized it the way you recognize a weather pattern. She filmed for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. She did not post it immediately. She sat with it for several hours, watching the footage back, thinking about what she knew, and what she could verify, and what she was actually prepared to do. She thought about the signs in the corridor, which she had read herself on her first day. She thought about the fact that she had not seen the incident with the dog, that she was working from partial information. She thought about Nina's face in that meeting room. She wrote her caption carefully. She stated only what she could confirm. A nurse had been terminated on day 89 of a 90-day probationary period. The reason given was unauthorized contact with a military working dog while the dog's handler was momentarily absent. There had been no injury, no aggressive behavior, no prior disciplinary record. She included no editorializing. She added no hashtags. She posted it at 9:42 on Monday evening on her personal account, which had just under 2,000 followers at the time. By midnight, it had been shared 600 times. By 6 the next morning, Laura Grant had 47,000 new followers, and her phone had stopped being a useful communication device because the notifications had overwhelmed every other function. The comment section split almost immediately. There was one side that reacted with straightforward outrage at what they saw as institutional cruelty. A young nurse fired one day before her probation ended. A career derailed over petting a dog. A system that valued paperwork over people. These comments were passionate and in some cases very loud. There was another side, smaller at first but growing steadily as military veterans and working dog handlers entered the conversation, that was trying with increasing frustration to explain something specific. They were trying to explain that military working dogs are not pets, that the prohibition on touching them is not bureaucratic decoration, that the behavioral conditioning required to make an animal like Aries reliable and safe in high-risk environments takes months of work and can be disrupted in ways that are not immediately visible. They wrote long, detailed comments. Some of them included links to official military publications. Some of them had handles and profile pictures that indicated years of relevant experience. Many of their comments were buried under replies from people who had already made up their minds. Both groups were right about some things. Neither group had the full picture. Greystone Regional Medical Center's communications team became aware of the video at approximately 7:30 Tuesday morning, when a junior staff member named Owen Price arrived early and made the mistake of opening social media before he had finished his coffee. He stared at his screen for a moment, then walked directly to the Director of Communications office and knocked on the door. The director, a woman named Karen Bell, was already at her desk. She had seen the video at 5 in the morning. She had been at her desk since 5:30. She looked like someone who had been trying, for the past 2 hours, to open a window that was painted shut. By 9, the hospital's leadership had convened an emergency communications meeting. By 10, a statement was being drafted. By 11:15, the statement had been reviewed by legal, revised 3 times, and approved. It was released at noon. The statement used the phrase, standard protocol compliance 4 times. It thanked the community for its concern, affirmed the hospital's commitment to both its staff and its federal partnership obligations, and stated that personnel decisions were handled with care and in accordance with all relevant legal and contractual frameworks. It did not mention Nina by name. It did not mention Aries. It did not mention the specific clause in the DoD contract that had, in Carroll's judgment, made the termination necessary. The response to the statement was not favorable. By 3 in the afternoon on Tuesday, Greystone's social media pages were receiving messages at a rate the hospital had never experienced. The communications team monitored the feeds without responding, which was, under the circumstances, the correct decision, because anything they said was going to generate more friction than silence. Karen Bell sat in her office with the door closed and a headache that no amount of water was improving, and thought about the gap between what was technically defensible and what people were prepared to accept. Nina, meanwhile, had spent Tuesday morning applying for nursing positions at 3 other hospitals in the region. She had not posted anything on social media. She did not know the video existed until her phone began receiving messages from people she had not spoken to in years, from nursing school classmates, from a woman she had worked with at a restaurant in her second year of university, from a distant cousin she had last seen at a family gathering when she was 16. All of them were asking, in various combinations of words, whether she was the nurse in the video. She found the video at 11:47 on Tuesday morning. She watched it twice. She sat with her phone in her hands for a long moment, in her apartment, with the rice cooker making its quiet sound in the kitchen, and traffic moving outside her window with no awareness of her at all. Then she called her mother. Her mother had already seen it. Her mother had 17 tabs open on her laptop and had been reading about Belgian Malinois behavioral conditioning for the past hour. Her mother said, "Nina, what do you want to do?" Nina said she did not know yet. She said it honestly, because she genuinely did not know. There was a version of events in which she accepted the situation, found another position, moved forward. There was another version in which she engaged with the attention that was now, rapidly and without her permission, forming itself around her story. She was a private person. She had gone into nursing because she wanted to take care of people in the room with her, not because she wanted to be seen by people she would never meet. But she also had $63,000 in student loans, an apartment lease with 9 months remaining, and 89 days of documented excellent performance that now existed nowhere in her employment record because the record had been closed. She called Laura Grant at 2 in the afternoon. Laura answered on the first ring. They talked for an hour and a half. Laura was careful, in that conversation, not to push Nina in any direction. She answered Nina's questions honestly. She explained what she had filmed, why she had filmed it, what she had verified before posting, and what she did not know. She told Nina that the video was now well beyond anything either of them could control, and that she wanted Nina to understand that before making any decisions. Nina thanked her. She said she needed another day. What Nina did not know, and what Laura did not know, and what the hospital's communications team had not yet discovered, was that the video had been seen by someone who was watching for an entirely different reason, someone who worked in an office that did not appear in any hospital directory, someone who had been monitoring the Greystone DoD contract for reasons that had nothing to do with Nina Lawson, or Sergeant Cooper, or the dog named Aries. That person had made a phone call on Tuesday afternoon. And on Wednesday morning, 4 men who were not on any staff list and not in any patient registry entered the main lobby of Greystone Regional Medical Center, asked for the administrator on duty, and were shown, without delay, to a conference room on the 2nd floor. They did not carry visible identification. They did not need to. Everyone in the room knew exactly who they were the moment they sat down. The 4 men arrived at Greystone at 8:14 on Wednesday morning. They came in through the main entrance, which was an unusual choice, the kind of choice that said they had no interest in being subtle. They wore civilian clothing, dark trousers and plain jackets, no insignia, nothing to identify them to someone who did not already know what to look for. But hospitals have security desks and security cameras and lobby staff who have spent years watching people walk through doors. And the woman at the front desk, a 26-year employee named Betty Oakes who had seen every variety of human being pass through those doors, looked up from her screen and knew within 10 seconds that these men were military, that they were serious, and that whoever they were looking for was about to have a very different Wednesday than they had planned. Betty called the administrator on duty. The administrator on duty was a man named Patrick Dole, 51 years old, Deputy Director of Operations, a careful and competent administrator who had navigated the hospital through 2 rounds of federal inspections and a significant insurance dispute, and who was not, by any measure, a man who rattled easily. He came down from his office on the 3rd floor, introduced himself, shook 4 hands, and led the group upstairs to the 2nd floor conference room without asking them any questions in the elevator, partly because he sensed they would not answer them, and partly because he needed 30 seconds to compose himself before the conversation began. The man who spoke first was named Russell Hale. He looked somewhere in his mid-40s, had the kind of lean build that comes from years of maintaining physical readiness rather than a gym membership, and spoke with the quiet, unhurried precision of someone who had spent a significant portion of his career in rooms where every word had weight. He did not identify his unit. He did not present a badge. He placed a single manila folder on the conference table, rested one hand on top of it, and told Patrick Dole that they were there regarding the security integrity of the hospital's 4th floor restricted wing. They were not there about Nina Lawson. Patrick would reflect on that later, the way a particular detail can seem insignificant in the middle of a situation and then become enormous when you look back at it from a distance. Because Nina Lawson was the reason the 4th floor was under a microscope. Her termination had set off the video, The video had set off the public attention. The public attention had created pressure on the hospital. The pressure on the hospital had caused people at various levels of the DoD partnership to take a closer look at the Greystone arrangement, and that closer look had found something that had nothing at all to do with a rookie nurse petting a dog in a corridor. It had been there for 7 months. The hospital's fourth-floor secure wing maintained its own credentialing system, separate from the general hospital network, with access controlled by a rotating clearance list that was updated quarterly by the DoD Liaison Office and cross-referenced against the hospital's own staff database. The system was designed to ensure that only currently authorized personnel could access the wing. It was a good system, on paper. In practice, the update cycle had fallen behind. The liaison officer responsible for the quarterly review, a man named Dennis Crawford who had held the position for 3 years, had been out on extended medical leave for the previous 8 months. His replacement had been slow to receive full system access and had been processing other priority work in the interim. The credentialing list had not been updated since the previous February. 3 individuals had credentials on the active list whose clearances had since expired or been suspended. None of them were patients. All 3 had card key access to the 4th floor. The discovery had been made during a routine audit that was itself routine only in the sense that it had been scheduled before any of the current events began. But the public attention on Greystone, prompted by the viral video, had caused the DoD office handling the hospital's contract to accelerate the audit timeline. Russell Hale's team had been assigned to the accelerated review 3 days earlier. They had found the credentialing gap on their first day of analysis. They had found something else on their second. Hale opened the folder and turned it so that Patrick could see the pages inside. The document on top was a visitor log, printed from the hospital's own system, with 3 rows highlighted in yellow. Patrick looked at the dates. He looked at the names. He looked at the access timestamps, which showed that all 3 individuals had used their card keys at various points in the previous 6 months. He looked at the 4th floor camera footage stills attached to the second page. He recognized 2 of the faces from the staff directory. One of them he knew personally, had spoken to in the break room, had shaken hands with at the previous year's departmental holiday gathering. He set the folder down and was quiet for a moment. "How did they get past the quarterly review?" he asked. "The quarterly review didn't happen," Hale said. "Not in the last cycle, and not in the one before it. Crawford was on leave. His replacement was managing 16 open tasks. This one fell through the gap." Patrick nodded slowly. His mind was moving through the implications in sequence, the way a trained administrator's mind does when it is confronted with a problem that is simultaneously an operations failure, a legal exposure, a federal compliance issue, and a human resources situation, all of which need to be triaged in the correct order before anything useful can be done. "What level of access did they have?" he asked. "Wing entry only. No patient record access. No medical system access. No medication or supply access. They could walk the corridor, and that is all the card key permitted." "And did they?" Hale paused for a fraction of a second, which told Patrick more than the answer that followed. "We are reviewing that," Hale said. Greta Walsh, the DoD liaison officer who had been present at Nina's termination meeting and who was now sitting at the far end of the conference table with a closed laptop and an expression that Patrick could not read, had not said anything yet. She said something now. "Mr. Dole," she said, "I want to be clear that the hospital is not presently under investigation. The credentialing failure occurred across multiple systems and multiple offices, and assigning responsibility for it is a separate process from what we are doing today. What we need from you, beginning on Thursday morning, is unrestricted access for an audit team to review the 4th floor access records, camera logs, visitor documentation, and staff credentialing files going back 18 months. "Thursday," Patrick said. "Thursday," Walsh said. Patrick looked at Hale. Hale looked back at him with the expression of someone who had already decided that Thursday was happening, and was simply allowing time for the other person in the conversation to arrive at the same conclusion. "You'll have everything you need," Patrick said. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes, covering the specific documentation the audit team required, the security protocols for the audit team's own access to the hospital's systems, the communication plan for informing relevant staff of the review, and the legal framework under which the audit would operate. Patrick's legal counsel, a woman named Claire Forsyth who had arrived at the meeting 20 minutes in after Patrick sent a text message from under the table, sat beside him and asked clarifying questions with the efficiency of someone who had learned, long ago, to get the important information while the room was still in a cooperative mood. When the four men left, they walked back through the lobby and out the main entrance with the same unhurried confidence with which they had arrived. Betty Oakes watched them go. She did not ask anyone what the meeting had been about. She would know soon enough. In the days that followed, the hospital moved quickly. The two administrators whose names appeared most prominently in the credentialing review were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the audit. Carol, in the HR office, received a call from the hospital's legal team at 4 on Wednesday afternoon and spent the next 2 hours reviewing the documentation around Nina's termination from an angle he had not previously considered. The 40-minute review that had preceded her dismissal was beginning to look, in light of the week's developments, like a much smaller thread in a much larger fabric. The audit team arrived on Thursday at 7:30. They were thorough, and they were quiet, and they worked for 9 days straight. By the end of the 9th day, they had produced a report that ran to over 200 pages and identified 17 separate procedural failures in the hospital's implementation of the DoD credentialing requirements. The 3 individuals with expired access were interviewed by federal compliance officers. 2 were cleared of any intentional wrongdoing, their entries in the wing corridor attributable to habit and the absence of any notification that their access had become invalid. The 3rd was a different matter, and that matter was handled through channels that did not make the news and were not discussed in the hospital cafeteria. The hospital cooperated fully. The DoD contract was not terminated, though it was suspended for a period while the compliance framework was rebuilt from the credentialing system outward. A new liaison officer was appointed. A redundant review process was put in place, with 2-person sign-off required for every quarterly update. Dennis Crawford did not return to his position. All of this unfolded in the weeks that followed that Wednesday meeting, in meeting rooms and email chains and conference calls that most of the hospital staff knew nothing about. The cafeteria filled and emptied. Patients came in through the emergency entrance and, most of them, went home again. Aries sat at his checkpoint and watched the corridor with his amber eyes, the same way he always had. And somewhere in the city, Nina Lawson sat in her apartment with her phone and her laptop and her student loan statements, watching a version of events unfold around her that she had not caused, could not control, and was only beginning to understand. The audit report landed on 5 separate desks in 2 different states on the same Friday afternoon, and by the following Monday morning, the paperwork that had filed Nina Lawson away as a compliance termination was being reopened in a way that Philip Carroll had not anticipated and was not entirely comfortable with, though he would later say, in the careful language that HR professionals use when describing events they cannot fully reverse, that the review was a natural and appropriate part of the process. What the review showed was this: Nina's termination had been executed correctly under the terms of the existing compliance protocol. The paperwork was clean, the process had followed the procedure, and the procedure, as the audit had now established across 17 separate findings, had been built on a credentialing and oversight framework that the hospital had not maintained with the diligence required by the federal contract. The hospital had held Nina to a standard of zero tolerance that it had not applied to its own administrative systems. She had touched a dog she was told not to touch. The administrators had failed to update a security clearance system for 8 months. One of these things had resulted in an immediate termination. The other had taken a 9-day federal audit to surface. Claire Forsyth, the hospital's legal counsel, had been thinking about this geometry since the Wednesday meeting. She had discussed it with the hospital's executive leadership. The conversation had been frank, which legal conversations between an institution and its own counsel sometimes are when the institution is in a position where frankness is less painful than the alternative. The hospital's communications office had also been doing its own thinking. The viral video had not gone away. It had evolved, the way attention on a story tends to evolve when new information enters it, into something more complicated and more durable than the initial outrage. Veterans and military handlers were still explaining, in patient and sometimes exasperated detail, why the rule about working dogs existed. Nina's supporters were still calling for the hospital to reverse its decision, but there was a third conversation now, quieter and more analytical, between people who were interested in what the audit had revealed and what it meant for the hospital's credibility in managing its side of a federal partnership. Karen Bell had been monitoring all three threads daily. She brought her analysis to the executive team on the second Thursday after the audit concluded. She laid out, in plain language with a clear-eyed lack of drama, what the communications landscape looked like from her vantage point. She said that the hospital's current public position was an anchor. She said the anchor was getting heavier. She said there was a window, still, to approach this differently, but that window had dimensions and the dimensions were shrinking. The executive team listened. The executive team asked Forsyth, again, what the legal exposure looked like in each direction. Forsyth had a document prepared and walked them through it section by section with the patience of someone who had given this particular briefing before and knew which parts of it would require 2 passes to land. The meeting lasted 3 hours. At the end of it, a decision was made. An intermediary reached out to Nina Lawson on a Friday morning, 3 weeks after her termination. The intermediary was a healthcare consultant named Alan Briggs, who worked regularly with regional hospitals on staffing and compliance matters, and who had been engaged by Greystone for this specific communication, which told Nina, before Alan Briggs said a word about the substance of the call, that the hospital was being careful. Institutions that are confident in their position do not hire intermediaries to make phone calls. They send letters on letterhead. Alan Briggs was professional and measured. He told Nina that the hospital had completed an internal review of the circumstances surrounding her termination, and that, in light of several factors including the administrative findings from the recent compliance audit, the hospital was prepared to offer her reinstatement to a nursing position, with back pay covering the period since her departure, in the newly structured veteran care unit that was being built as part of the post-audit partnership framework. He said the offer was genuine. He said there was no requirement that she accept it. He said the hospital understood that she was under no obligation to view this favorably, and that if she had questions or wished to have legal representation review any written offer, the hospital would accommodate whatever timeline was reasonable. Nina listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she thanked him and said she would need a few days. She called Laura Grant first, not for advice exactly, but because Laura had been part of the sequence of events that had led to this phone call, and Nina felt that she deserved to know about it directly, rather than reading it later. Laura listened and said very little, which was, Nina had come to learn in the weeks of their unlikely acquaintance, Laura's way of showing respect. She asked one question. What does your gut say? Nina said she was not sure her gut was giving her reliable information at the moment. She called her mother second. Her mother said, what do you want? Not what makes sense, not what solves the problem. What do you want? Nina thought about the answer to that question for most of the afternoon. What she wanted, she realized, was to be a nurse, not specifically at Greystone, not as a statement, not as a vindication of anything. She wanted to be back in a ward with patients who needed her, with Carol Sims moving through the department like a compass needle, always pointing north, with the specific satisfaction of doing the work she had trained for. She had not wanted to be a symbol or a social media story or a case study in institutional compliance failure. She had just wanted to do her job. She called Alan Briggs back on Sunday evening and told him she would accept the offer. She asked one thing in return, which was not in the existing offer, and which she asked simply, without pressure or negotiation language. She asked whether there was any possibility of a conversation with Sergeant Cooper, not a formal meeting, not a recorded mediation, just a conversation. She wanted to tell him directly that she understood, now, in a way she had not understood standing in that corridor, why the rule existed, and what she had put at risk by ignoring it. She said she did not need him to accept the apology. She just wanted to say it. Alan Briggs said he could not promise anything but that he would pass the message along. She did not hear back about that request for 11 days. On a Tuesday morning in early November, 2 months after her termination, Nina Lawson walked back into Greystone Regional Medical Center through the main entrance. She had her badge on a lanyard. Carol Sims met her at the elevator with 2 coffees, and the expression of someone who had maintained a controlled and professional silence about the situation for 8 weeks, and was now extremely relieved to be done maintaining it. They went upstairs together. Nina's first patient was a 47-year-old veteran named Roger, who had a complicated knee injury and a very strong opinion about physical therapy that his surgeon did not entirely share. Within 20 minutes, Nina was in the middle of the conversation, asking exactly the right questions, making exactly the right notes. She did not go up to the fourth floor. She did not walk past the K9 checkpoint. She was not sure, that first day, whether that was the right decision or just the easier one, and she was honest enough with herself to know she might not be able to tell the difference yet. What she did not know, on that Tuesday morning, was that Sergeant Cooper had read Alan Briggs's message, that he had thought about it for 4 days, that he had shown it to no one, and discussed it with no one, because it was not the kind of thing he shared easily, if at all. She did not know that on the previous Sunday, Cooper had picked up his phone and opened a private forum for military handlers and personnel that he had been part of for 6 years, and had typed and deleted 4 different things, before settling on a single photograph. The photograph was of Ares in his working harness, standing at a checkpoint that was not Greystone, looking at the camera with the serene, unconcerned authority that was simply how Ares looked at everything. The caption underneath it read, "Still working, still not to be touched." Someone in the comments within the hour had replied, "Heard that dog had something to do with saving a nurse's career." Cooper looked at the comment. He looked at it for a while. He put his phone face down on the table and went to bed. In the morning, the comment was still there. He had not deleted it. 3 weeks later, Nina found the post through a circuitous chain of links that started with Laura Grant sending her a screenshot, with no text, just a question mark. She looked at the photograph of Ares for a long time. She read the caption. She read the comment. She read Cooper's non-response, which told her, in the language she had spent the past 2 months learning to read, more than any response would have. She did not reach out publicly. She did not share the post or write about it or mention it in the interview she had been asked to give and had declined. She saved the photograph of Ares to her phone. She looked at it sometimes, on the quiet nights in her apartment, when the day had been long and the paperwork was done, and the rice cooker was making its small, steady sound in the kitchen. She looked at those amber eyes, steady and watchful, and giving nothing away, and she thought about the specific chain of events that had led from one impulsive, warm-hearted, entirely inadvisable moment in a corridor to everything that had followed it. A dog she was told not to touch, a man who filed the right paperwork, a woman who filmed through a window, a credentialing system that no one had checked, 4 men in plain jackets who walked through a lobby on a Wednesday morning. All of it connected, none of it simple, most of it invisible until it wasn't. She put her phone down. She finished her tea. She went to bed. Because she had a 6:30 shift and $63,000 in student loans, and a patient named Roger who had very strong opinions about his own recovery, and who, if she was honest, reminded her a little of herself. She set her alarm. She turned off the light. The story, as far as anyone could tell, was over. The audit was complete. The paperwork was filed. The contracts were restructured. The public attention had moved on, the way public attention always does, to the next thing and the next person and the next 60 seconds of footage that would make the world briefly, collectively furious, or sad, or both at the same time. Ares sat at his new checkpoint, wherever that checkpoint was, doing the only thing he had ever done, working, not to be touched. And somewhere in that, Nina thought, there was something that was almost a lesson, or maybe just a truth, which was that some things in the world are not soft and were never meant to be, and that reaching for them anyway, out of ordinary human warmth, can set 100 other things in motion that you will spend a very long time trying to understand. She understood it a little better now. She was still learning,